Between Australia and China have escalated as mining magnate Andrew Forrest brushes off criticism for inviting the Chinese Consul General, the Victorian Chinese Consul General, to a media conference with Health Minister Greg Hunt without the minister's knowledge. The controversy has attracted accusations of disloyalty and even selfishness from some government MPs, including Liberal MP Tim Wilson. He joins me now. Tim, great to have you on the show.
Thanks for having me.
It was pretty ordinary, I thought, of... Yeah, that's cool. It was pretty ordinary, I thought, of Twiggy Forrest to sort of almost ambush the Health Minister with that press conference yesterday afternoon.
Ordinary is one way of putting it. I think a lot of parliamentary colleagues' response, which has been fierce in its condemnation and criticism, is a pretty clear sentiment about how most of us see it. The reality is, let's imagine the scenario reversed. Imagine a Chinese business person invited the Australian ambassador during a diplomatic disagreement to the podium at a conference in the Ministry of Health in Beijing. I don't think they would just be receiving criticism from local CCP officials. In fact, if the situation were reversed, I would think that particular business person should be getting their affairs in order because they don't know what's coming next. That's why I think so many people have taken such exception to what Twiggy Forrest did yesterday. And raises very serious questions about what his motivations were.
Well, it's clear what his motivations were. I mean, he makes a lot of money out of his relationships with China, but the sentiment today seems to be, Tim, that Twiggy Forrest should stick to the knitting, stick to his mining, and let our political leaders, including the Prime Minister and, of course, you know, the Foreign Affairs Minister and, of course, senior cabinet ministers, do the bidding when it comes to our relationship with China. And what's at heart here, Tim, is very simple, and that is Australians just want some answers from the Chinese as to what happened with the coronavirus pandemic. We just want to know what actually went down so that we can put in place measures to make sure that it doesn't happen again. It's not an unreasonable request, is it?
Not at all. And this is the absurdity, the gross overreaction of the ambassador to very simple comments made by our Prime Minister that there has been an outbreak of an infection that has brought the world to a standstill, had a massive effect on employment and jobs and, of course, health and deaths. And we want a simple investigation to understand the origins. And, you know, we're quite relaxed about whatever it comes out with. We just want to know to make sure it doesn't happen again. And the reality is it was only last week that Chinese officials were talking up the idea that its actual origins were in the United States. So if they actually believe that,
yes,
then they should fear nothing of an independent investigation, because the impact of an investigation will simply be to ascertain where it started, how it started, the consequences that led to the outbreak, to make sure that we can get proper accountability. And when we talk about it in the context of Twiggy, he said earlier in the day that he wanted to delay in the investigation until after the US presidential election. It seemed more like he was interested in the politics of this than getting to the impact it has on people's health and well-being.
Tim, what are your thoughts on the WHO's involvement in all this? They've copped a lot of criticism. We've seen what President Trump has said in the United States. There's no suggestion that we will withdraw any funding. They do some good work, particularly in the South Pacific. But surely, in any ongoing probe into how this originated, the WHO's involvement must be paramount.
Oh, absolutely. And the role of the WHO is critical to the extent that they worked with foreign governments to or accepted their offerings on face value about where the virus came from and the extent of the outbreak, whether they were properly being held to account, and also whether they were being captured by foreign governments. You know, and after the SARS outbreak in the early 2000s, there were whole reforms to the World Health Organization in the attempt to make sure that this did not happen again. Now, it clearly has, so there is a case for further reform to look at the role of WHO and its whether it's fulfilling its mandate in the interest of the health of the global community.
Now, Tim, I know you have a soft spot for our regions. I know you've done plenty of miles out west, and there's an ongoing issue in relation to insurance for some of these bushfire-prone areas that have copped it, obviously, over summer. You have some concerns about insurance payouts. Where's that at?
Well, what we were asking yesterday, I chair the Economics Committee of the House of Representatives, and we had the insurance companies before us yesterday to hold insurance companies to account about not just their responses to the COVID-19 outbreak, but also around making sure that they were supporting bushfire-affected communities who are still in need of rebuild. We shouldn't forget about them just because we have the coronavirus pandemic. So by asking them questions yesterday and making sure they were stepping through every single bit of redress or assistance they're providing for bushfire communities is important as part of that rebuild. And the reality is there's a long way to go. There are a lot of communities who still have housing and support and community infrastructure that needs to be rebuilt. That is obviously going to take some time, but insurance has to be an important part of that solution.
All right, now I've been asking most of your colleagues this question, and I'm going to ask you this question tonight. Have you had a chance to read Malcolm Turnbull's book, and what are your thoughts if you have?
There's a copy right behind me, so I've read parts of it, but not all of it. You know, like a lot of politicians, you go to the back of the index and see whether you're mentioned or not. I am. And
you are?
look, you know, when you live through a period like that, and I was a member of Parliament through some of Malcolm Turnbull's term as Prime Minister, you look and see whether it's an accurate and honest assessment. There are things that I wouldn't characterise as they were. I thought he covered me and dealt with me relatively fairly, so I have no complaints. Yeah,
well, I mean, I asked a couple of your colleagues and most of them said that they hadn't read it, which I found to be somewhat incredulous. But anyway, Tim Wilson, great to have you on Sky News Across Australia tonight. Really appreciate your time.
Thank you so much.